comment right now because we're curious. What kind of offense are you running out there? So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, are you running a 5-1 or you're running a 6-2? That's going to lead us into what we're going to talk about next. The fourth ranked team was the University of Pittsburgh, and we're going to show you their offensive system. They ran a 6-2. Mike, and we can talk a little bit about a 6-2 offense because it's super popular, but essentially 3 hitters in every rotation.
Yep, and everyone else feel free to chime in here, but 6-2 is like Dave said, we can always have 3 front row hitters. Typically you'll run a 6-2 if you have 2 reasonably competent, close in ability setters. I would advise coaches to know that before you make the decision to run a 6-2. I think sometimes we just like the idea of a 6-2 because it gets more players on the court, and certainly that is a benefit of that system. But we can't have a 6-2 if one of our setters is setting a 300 offense and the other setter setting 100 offense. And I think that exists out there fairly often. And so coaches, before you jump into a 6-2, just make sure that both your setters are reasonably close in ability. But here, Dave, back up here. You can see, let's see,
We just had a rotation 3 side out with number 10 here as the setter, and then you can explain what happens next.
Yep. So number 10 is going to stay left front. They're going to sub their opposite out. And number 1 here, who's serving, is going to be their setter now. So she's the back row setter. And number 10, who was setting in the back row, is now in the front row, and she is going to be an attacker. So let's see how this works. Oh, a little clunky there, but.
Sorry, here's their next rotation 4 play.
Okay.
Then we're going to see in rotation 5 and 6, she has some really good swings, so it's actually impressive that she's setting at a Final Four level, but also attacking at a Final Four level. And I think it's interesting to ask, like we talked about it for a few minutes last episode, how do we decide if we have this really good athlete, is she going to be our setter or is she going to be our attacker, or in very rare instances like this, both?
So you can run a 6-2 with subs, and you can sub your setters out and bring in front row attackers, or you can run a true 6-2, and this is a little bit of a hybrid. Here you see number 10 coming back to serve. So she's playing all the way around, and they just subbed the front row opposite back in for number 1, and away they go. And so it's an option. Building an offensive system around, the abilities of players in your gym. That's a great example of them doing that, and they did it successfully. They had the number 2 offense in the tournament, I don't know if that was season or tournament, what it was, but highly successful nonetheless. Hi, Garion. Does she have a question?
Nope, I'm just we're just going through lots of 5-1s, 6-2s from Nick because tiny setters. Gary, how would you recommend coaches decide what kind of offense they're going to run? So you're in the preseason and you have, of course, every team has multiple setters, but how are we going to decide and commit, I'm going to run a 5-1 or I'm going to run a 6-2, and what kind of trial and error should go into making that decision?
Yeah, I think you're right about the preseason, about experimenting with what you have. One of the things we'll look at in preseason is where do we think we can be special this year? What are the things about the makeup of the roster that we have that allows us to be kind of the best performing team in 4 months? I think back to kind of our first year where we had Lauren Carlini and our right side was Courtney Thomas, who was a former setter here at Wisconsin, and trying to figure out how do we fit in 2 really, really good setters into our offense. When we kind of looked at the makeup, we had middles that could attack the slide, which in a 6-2 can be a little bit more difficult, especially in transition. So when you're looking at kind of what do you want to build your system around or your team around, I think at the youngest ages, the more you get them involved in multi-contact, everyone being able to pass, everyone being able to set, everyone being able to hit, I think is really good. And then when you get kind of later into the high school year of defining, all right, who can run our offense at its highest level and what's the makeup of the attackers we have? If you don't have a slide attack, you may be looking a little bit more of a 6-2 than a 5-1.
I think I froze here. All right. Okay.
I got you.
Can I chime in with this too? I think one other piece is you got to look at your outsides and their ability to pass, because you're going to end up burning your subs through your opposite and setter rotations if you're doing a true 6-2 and subbing both your setters out. So your left sides have to have the ability to hold up in the passing rotation because you can't sub them out. And so the 6-2 is interesting. You kind of need pieces in a bunch of different places to make it work and be functional at a high level across the board.
Yep. The other, I think the last thing we'll point out is sometimes we'll run a 6-2 just because we have short setters. And perhaps there's probably situations where that totally makes sense. There's probably situations too where your shortest setter is by far your best setter, and it probably makes sense to be in a 5-1 even though she's short or he's short. So solely seen it, on the international men's side, there's, France just won an Olympic gold medal. Their setter they have two really good setters right now. Their smaller setter he's won VNL gold medals. He's just this little guy that runs an outstanding offense. And clearly he's got a lot of good weapons around him, but I don't think a short setter is a good enough reason in and of itself to run a 6-2. Again, all we care about at the end of the day is effectiveness. What is working? How are we going to kill the ball repeatedly over the course of a match, the quarter of a season? And so care less about, a short setter that may not be the best blocking, right side blocker, and care more about, can they run the offense? Can they dig? Can they do some other things? And so, again, at the highest of levels, international, collegiate, Courtney Thompson, there's all these examples out there of short setters, Long Beach State men, who don't have a huge impact on the game blocking, but they're winning championships. And so, again, make sure they can dish the rock first and foremost. That's the number one goal of a setter. We good,
Jalen, we know the stereotype of setters that can't play defense. So what if you have a setter that has the best hands, but she's weak defensively? What trumps what?
I'm with Mike, and what Eric talked about is just making sure that, the setter needs to be able to run your offense. And if, a 6-2 is no good if, like what Mike said, one's setting a 300 offense and one's setting 100 offense. So I think number one priority of a setter is to be able to, get your team in good side out and point scoring situations. And then you kind of figure out everything from there. Our setter, our starting setter the last couple of years wasn't a great blocker. She was a great defender, but wasn't a great blocker in the front row. And but we just kind of felt like, okay, we can kind of try to mask that a little bit, but her ability to kind of set the ball for us kind of outweighs maybe some of her other deficiencies, if that makes sense. So I think the ability for the setter to lead the offense and, try to get the highest attack percentage as you possibly can is more important than maybe some other things that she can do.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe Solly and Gary, maybe you guys have experienced this type of setter, but I mean, I feel like every setter has their strengths and weaknesses. And, when if you get a setter that's phenomenal at running the offense, just a fabulous setter, and she's a fabulous blocker, and she can dig, and she's a good server, that's very unique, I would say. And so, for those of you listening, it's not likely that you're going to have that type of a setter in your gym. And again, we have to prioritize running the offense and then do the best you can around that.
It's a unicorn, Mike. They don't exist.
Yeah. It's like, how often do you get a libero that's a phenomenal passer and a phenomenal digger? Like, that exists more, I would think, but certainly there's that too. So, all right, cool. Dave.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Keep the questions coming.